Morning, everybody. Welcome to this SELEP Legacy Webinar. I'm Liz Gibney. I'm a SELEP Board Director. I'm also the Chair of the Coastal Communities Group for SELEP, and I work with Brian Horton, who you will hear from later, and Nick Fenton, who's one of our panellists on housing, specialist housing delivery for SELEP. I'm also the chair of KMEP, which is another example of public-private partnership based for Kent and Medway. And in my day job, I'm a partner at Lee Evans Partnership, who are architects in Kent. First of all, we're going to pop a question onto your screen for you to have a look at. There's going to be several questions because this is an interactive session. So you should see something appear on your screen for you to answer very shortly. Sure if I can see that. Hoping that's worked. I can't see it from my end, but I'm hoping that's worked for the people on the webinar. It should be a really interesting event this morning. We've got some really interesting panelists, and oh, here we go. Here's the question. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to have a think about that. Just while you're doing that, just to let you know that the questions and the input from today's session will be recorded. This session is being recorded, and all of your answers to all the questions will be recorded to produce a guide for public-private partnerships, which is being produced alongside this event. That will be circulated to everybody who's attended the session, and this outlines the core principles and foundations of effective partnership working, but it would be good to see some of the comments made from today appearing in that. So this is a really interactive session. So the aims of the event this morning are to understand the importance of the effective partnership working between the public sector and private sector that have delivered positive outcomes to the region, because this has really been the way SELEP has been working since 2011. It's, from my experience, we have the really, really good shared strategic vision, particularly, as I say, I work in the housing strategic visioning section with Brian and Nick. And the synergy across the whole region has a really significant impact, not just in local areas, but shared knowledge of things we've looked at, stuff to do with water neutrality and things, which we've been able to really share knowledge across the whole region, which has been really, really good. The panel discussion that's going to take place is going to get some really good reflections from our excellent panelists, talking about their experiences and examples. We've got, as you would imagine, public and private people here who are going to talk about not just their experience, but how they think SELEP has influenced and improved the way that they've been able to work over the previous years. And they have collectively inputted into the guide, which is, as I say, will be circulated after this. I'm going to hand over in a minute to Brian, who I'm sure many of you have seen before. He is our Uber host, who was the master of panel discussions. He will, and eyebrow movements, he will be asking all our panelists to introduce themselves. There will be more interactive sessions. So thank you, everybody, for coming. And I now will hand over to you, Brian.
Thank you very much. And apologies for the phone going in the background. That's downstairs, so I can't do anything about that. But it will ring off in a moment. But yeah, probably colleagues may have seen me. They've probably heard me as well. So apologies for that. And you're going to hear quite a lot more from me this morning, but also, more importantly, the really great cohort of speakers that we have that are working in partnership with us today at the LEP to deliver this. Now, I also have a question that I'm going to pose while we're doing some initial introductions. So if that can be launched, please. There you go. So this one is kind of closed field. So which do you feel are the top 3 priorities for the foundations of good partnership please only pick 3. So if you can do that, then I'm just going to say a little bit more about myself as part of my way of introduction, and then bring in my colleagues who will start to share their insights and their wisdom on the issue. So I'm Brian Horton. I'm the Strategic Housing Advisor to SELEP. I increasingly describe myself as a housing enthusiast. So, and my background is predominantly public sector housing, but I work very much now in that space between public and private sector, very much like the LEP, but particularly with our developer groups, the Kent Housing and Development Group, the Developers East Sussex, the Developers Group for East Sussex, and the Essex Developers Group, and cumulatively in the SELEP Housing and Development Group, which is the group that I particularly work with Liz and Nick in. But as well as doing that, I'm well known for showing off and facilitating sessions like this. And so that's why I've been asked this morning to do this. So what I'm going to do now is in a reasonably structured way, ask colleagues to introduce themselves, but also say something about the sort of essay question for this morning. And the first people I want to bring in are Sally and Sarah. So if you can introduce yourselves and then share your wisdom, that I'd be very, very good.
Thanks, Brian. So I'm Sarah Wren, and I work for Kent County Council in the Cultural and Creative Economy team. And Sally Staples, who is the team manager for culture and tourism at East Sussex. And together for quite some time now, we've worked on the South East Creative Economy Network, which is a subgroup of the LEP, and a private-public partnership between the public sector and the creative industries. Sally.
So to start off with, Sarah and I just thought we would share some anecdotes with you, which we think really illustrate some of the areas that we've learned about how to make a private-public partnership successful. And the first actually was something we were having a chuckle about the other day. We'd both heard the same interview on Radio 4's Today programme in the morning, where they were interviewing the producer and the director of Bristol Light Festival, which is just launching this weekend. Obviously a great opportunity for sort of sector people that we're supporting all the time, a massive audience to sell their product. And their opening line was, "We have 10 installations in the city." And Sarah and I were both saying that we were both sitting over our breakfast with our head in our hands going, what? Like, what on earth does that mean? We know what that means. It means they've made some great art commissions in 10 places around the beautiful city of Bristol. The journalist did a really good job of drawing it out. And what they've actually done is work with the BBC National History Unit, which is based in Bristol. That in itself was an interesting thing to learn. And apparently they're sort of doing these amazing light projections on a massive scale. Such an easy thing to sell. But what was so interesting was them starting with that technical language, which, you know, we've been working in this sector long enough to know a lot of people, they're going to hear installation, they're going to hear new boiler, you know, how many radiators do you need? They're not going to hear something sexy. So for us, one of the big learning things about being really careful about when you bring people from different backgrounds into the room is choosing your language really carefully.
Thanks. And it's, you know, thinking about language, one of the things that we often hear about the creative industries is that, oh, creative businesses are really bad at doing business, and creative people are really bad at doing business. And it really begs the question as to why are the creative industries the largest growing sector in the UK? And it's about those micro misunderstandings that are kind of perpetuated and create barriers to partnership and growth. So South East Creative Economy Network, we call CCEN, and was the starting point for the South East Creative Business Support Programme. And we set it up as a collaboration right from the start with the creative businesses and the sector, and mobilised the sector to become partners and to lead on delivery, and made sure that the people we were working with had mission match in what we wanted to achieve. So we set up, we appointed local coordinators who were local people already operating in the sector, locally based, and we had cultural hubs that became our beacons and soft landing places. And and just made sure that there was that translation going on between the sector and, you know, what was quite a complex ERDF program. So my question is, who are your translators? Who's working, has feet in both camps and is able to talk both languages and talk truth to power?
And then the other thing we reflected on is that, you know, we've been quite a double act for the South East Creative Economy Network. And the reason for that is because we just happen to have job descriptions that are real mission match with what the South East Creative Economy Network stands for. So we're often relied on to get the work done, which is another really critical bit of any partnership, is you've got to have people who've got the time and the resources to actually make stuff happen. And one of our most recent successes was the application for the Create Growth programme, which is now being delivered as Create South East. But the story behind that was, Sarah and I came off of a CCAN meeting realising that the assumption had been made that we would write an expression of interest, and we were really grumpy because we didn't have it in our work programme and we didn't really know what was expected of us. But what was absolutely extraordinary about that was so many people came to us and said, we'll help. And we weren't expecting that. And it was such a relief. And people brought such different skills to the table. We secured the expression of interest, we got through, we then had to write a whole bid. So the summer before last, which I always laughingly refer to as the summer of love, we went through something like a 4-week period where we met as a team every single morning for 4 weeks. And extraordinarily, we all really loved it and we still reminisce about it. And the reason for that was because everyone turned up at the table saying, what can I do, not what can I get? It was a phenomenal range of skills based from the private and the public sector. But also Sarah chaired those meetings and she created a really sort of fun atmosphere. We always had a laugh. By the end of it, we had all sorts of in-jokes. And we genuinely, even though we're really busy people, were really disappointed when it came to an end and we were no longer seeing each other every morning because we'd really enjoyed the process. We went on to secure that money, and the kind of the capital, the social capital we built up during that process is really helping us to navigate what is a very challenging process to run. And the important thing about that was, again, it was both private and public partners all coming together and working together.
And I was just going to finish, Sally, because I think so. I was just going to reflect that the benefits of CCAN really have been that it's been about, it's sector led, it's chaired by the sector, it's an open network, it's completely free of charge, and there's no eligibility. So if you're in the least bit interested, you're in. You're part of the team, and you're very welcome. Thanks, Brian.
No, thank you, Sally, Sarah. No, really useful, very interesting. Just for the white label colleagues, are we able to show the results of the first question? Is that going to come up? But if not, if we can have that ready from when we've done these initial introductions. So Nick, over to you. If you can introduce yourself, and I was going to say share some of your wisdom, but that might not take too long. But if you can share your wisdom, that would be very much appreciated. Nick and I work together a lot, so we're little boys really a lot of the time. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Brian. So my name's Nick Fenton. I'm chair predominantly of the Kent Housing and Development Group, but also chair of the SELEP Housing and Development Group. The Kent Development Group is a member-led organisation. The membership includes people like Natural Environment Agency, Homes England, National Highways, for a very good reason. We need them in the room to lead decisions and to sort of assist us in trying to bring things forward. I also sit on the board of Locating Kent. I also sit on the board of the Kent Nature Partnership and the SAMS project up in North Kent, looking after the migratory wildlife, birds. I also assist quite heavily with East Sussex and various other bits and pieces. But the reason I mention that is the importance that not only housing has on the area, but also infrastructure and commercial development. That's jobs and skills, which is so important. For me, the issue is the initial start of the discussions is about cooperation and trust. Going back a long time ago when I used to start presenting to some of the public sector colleagues, I used to put up a slide of myself standing there in striped pajamas with a swag bag over my shoulder, because that's how I was seen. And it's how you build that trust so that you can go in the room and assist and help people resolve problems, find a joint way of actually getting around these things. And that's why people like Natural England, the likes of a membership, because we want to be able to discuss with them and actually find ways to actually resolve many of the problems. A very good example of this was when COVID hit. We had a very early conversation with DLUG, whereby they asked for a weekly update as to what was going on in the industry and how could we assist in actually bringing that forward. We had those on a regular basis for quite a few months, and then it switched over to a monthly, then a quarterly discussion more recently. But the comments were made fairly succinctly by the people at DLUG when they actually said to us, do not underestimate the effect you had on our thinking at the time. And that is such an important part of it, where you can bring people like the developers groups in Essex, East Sussex and Kent together with other like-minded organisations to find solutions and actually become very strong advocate for what we need to achieve. Myself and Brian also assisted in rationalising the Essex Developers Group and also setting up the Sussex Developers Group. So it shows how good working relationships and best practice can be brought forward and utilised in other areas. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much, Nick. And I'd really echo that kind of respect and listening to each other and kind of finding common cause point that Nick referred to there. So if I can ask Deirdre now to introduce yourself and I'm sure share some wisdom without any qualifications whatsoever. Over to you, Deirdre.
Thank you, Brian. Really good to be here. So for those who don't know me, I'm Deirdre Wells. I'm Chief Executive of Visit Kent. I also am on the board of the Tourism Alliance, which is a national lobbying organisation on all things tourism, and I chair English Tourism Week, which is coming up on the 17th to the 24th of March. So get that in your diary if you want to go out and support your local tourism business. And I probably, again, don't need to say this, but just it's worth mentioning that tourism is big business, and for Kent alone, it's worth about £4 billion, 10% of all jobs. So, you know, a really significant part of our economy in the southeast. We've been collaborating with SELEP pretty much since SELEP was set up, and working on a whole range of projects. Many years ago, we worked on a project called Gourmet Garden Trails, which was a national project, but had SELEP support. I think the thing that was really important, always has been with our collaboration with SELEP, is around the ability to act at scale, and also to deliver activity cross-boundary. Because whilst there are very distinctive elements to all of this sort of constituent parts of the SELEP region, and even within county, you know, lots of places have a very distinctive offer and distinctive challenges as well. What working at a SELEP scale enables you to do is to deliver economies of scale on things like research, on funding programs, and also to really support businesses which have a lot in common wherever they find themselves in the region. And of course, our visitors don't see the political boundaries that we all have to operate under. So I think that scale and you know, bandwidth that that working at that regional level gave us was really important. I think where it really came into its own was during COVID. So COVID was a very bizarre experiment for our industry in terms of what happens when you basically turn it off. And what happens is the life and soul goes out of our places. And you know, it's been very interesting post-COVID to see that the hospitality industry has been filling the void, and in many of our high streets, which was left by retail, and that people are choosing experiences much more over stuff as they, you know, make memories with family again when they weren't able to do that for some time. What I would say was the particular huge advantage of working with SELEP was, I remember Joe picking up the phone to me. I think it might have been lockdown 2, and just saying, Deirdre, what can we do to help? What would an ideal program look like? What does the business need? We had probably about an hour chat on the phone about the sort of challenges that we were seeing, and hearing from businesses. I was on, Sally was talking about her daily fun calls. I was on my daily tourism emergency response call with DCMS, which was less fun. But you know, how do businesses navigate the guidelines? How can they rebuild in those kind of pockets of reopening that we had? You know, what do we really need? And that developed into 2 major projects. One was on rebuilding confidence, and the other was one called Revive, which is around placemaking. And a shout out to Sally and to lots of partners around it, and to Lisa, who's not on the call, maybe on the call. Working with Essex and Sussex was critical, because I think we all were experiencing similar challenges for our businesses. We all understood the drop in demand from our visitors, but we really worked hard to collaborate in terms of delivering for the businesses, but doing it at speed and in a flexible way that was what they really needed at the time. I think a particular opportunity was the fact that the collaborating on a project that is SELEP wide, that has some funding attached to it, enabled people to be able to participate. But I think there was a collaborative approach that enabled people to lead with their skills. So, for example, Essex had much more financial infrastructure in terms of being able to get grants out quickly. They took the lead on that. And Sussex and ourselves in Kent were much more around this sort of engaging with businesses, developing the projects. And we used sort of tried and tested consumer-facing activities such as our big weekend to really drive that consumer footfall. So I think being asked the question by the SELEP team about what was needed, and us having the on-the-ground experience of talking to businesses, talking to consumers, and be able to feed that evidence into shaping the programme was really critical. And I think that's why the programme was so successful. 80% of businesses said that they wouldn't have bought the thing that they were going to buy with the grant if it hadn't been available. We're talking £2,000 grants in many cases, but it basically, I think, made the difference between survival and not during COVID. So thank you to all the partners on the team, and thank you to SELEP.
Deirdre, thank you very much indeed, and I'm sure the SELEP colleagues will be grateful for that acknowledgement of the role of working with you, and I know they're equally grateful for the work that you did. So I'd like to bring in now Helen and Jeremy, please. Again, introductions and your kind of I'm going to say it again, and your wisdom on the issue. So over to you guys.
Hi, thank you, Brian. So I'm Helen Clements. I'm the chair of the Skills Advisory Panel, which I'll call the SAP from now on to save me saying all 3 words. And in my day job, I am a senior social value manager for Morgan Sindall Construction across the east of England. So the Skills Advisory Panel was set up, it was mandated that the LEPs had to have a skills advisory panel that was led and driven by industries and employers, and in partnership with public sector. So it was established in 2019 for SELEP, and it really did strengthen the employer's voice. The group was majority of employers, and public sector supported through education and various other forms. We also had large employers and small employers. There's a real variety. So we had people like Stanford Airport, DP World, Berry Gardens, Konica Minolta, I can never say that one, and also FE and HE, as well as other local authority. We met up quarterly. What was really beneficial was having hard evidence data that supported all of the industries and keeping abreast of what was going on. Where were the job opportunities? COVID was a really interesting time when we could see what industries were really impacted more. And we were collectively able to support one another through those conversations and sharing what our challenges were. And, you know, we cover a large geography, SELEP, and that regular communication and lobbying to MPs and ministers and showcasing the work that was being done across all industries and raising the profile was really beneficial. And some notable areas of work were we ran various events, particularly driven by COVID, probably, in as much that we did this innovative online career fair with presentations from various sectors, and it felt really like being in a hall with your banners and your tables and your tablecloths, and people were able to access this, and it was for young people as well as adults. And we had Skills Minister Robert Halfon support that and was a keynote speaker for it. We've also created, as a group, a range of videos and materials for apprenticeships. There was a digital skills partnership established through the collaboration of SAP and DCMS, which led to work with us working with Google, Microsoft, and many, many more. We also created a website to showcase skills and share labour market information, which has been extensively used across the area. And that's really beneficial, particularly at perhaps at entry-level routes, to give education the opportunity, one, to see what training provision it needs to provide, but also to help young people identify what industries are recruiting and perhaps what ones are less recruiting. Although I think one of the common things was we're all recruiting and there's not enough people and we're all competing with one another. And actually, what were some of those common challenges, things like diversity, inclusion, that was pretty much nearly every sector was having challenges around that, and we were able to collaborate and come up with sharing best practice to address that. There was also a careers magazine, and sector profiles were developed and utilised, and there are local examples underway, such as the Essex Careers magazine, which goes out to all educators across Essex, and businesses have pages in that, and it's updated annually since. So it's been really beneficial. There was also, there was running alongside, there was a major projects group, and we felt that skills needed to join with us. So we, as the SAP, we would have a voice at that major skills group to make sure that anything that they were talking about cross-referenced with us, and we really collaborated on that to make sure that there was nothing being missed. And that work's actually going to continue. And as a group, we felt that we really wanted to stay together and really carry on sharing that best practice. Some of the key things that we're looking at and still working on collectively is tutor shortages. There's some sectors that are being really impacted by that, such as construction, and it's how we work with that. We're working with the CITB Training Board and the industry to really try and drive home, you know, how can we address this, and what initiatives can we do through the pots of funding that are available, and through hearing perhaps what some other sectors have done to address it in their own world. So I'm going to hand over to Jeremy now.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeremy Carswell. I'm the CEO and Principal of Plumpton College in East Sussex. I also sit on the board of Landex, which represents all land-based education training providers nationally. I'm the current chair of FE Sussex, so all further education institutes across Sussex, and I've had the pleasure of being part of South East SELEP's Skills Working Group for over 5 years, and chairing it for, I think, about the last 3. So as Helen has explained, the Skills Working Group actually predated the advisory panel before the 2 were merged. And so therefore, it goes back some years, and as its name suggests, its core remit is education, skills, and training. And through, as you can imagine, therefore, a very diverse membership, including local authorities, FE colleges, higher education institutes, district councils, private training providers, and the prison network, across that very large geographical area that we've all referred to. It's played quite a pivotal role, I think it's fair to say, in terms of the skills and education landscape over a number of years. Informing, influencing, lobbying, as well as cascading many, many opportunities as a result of the very rich discussions that have been had over the years. Most notably, the Skills Working Group were, I think, quite influential in informing the LEP's skills strategy, which, as always, provides a clear framework, a reference point, and a foundation from which a lot of the focus of both the Skills Working Group and the advisory panel based their energies. And the Skills Working Group also, in the years that it ran, played quite a pivotal role in mandating or overseeing the LEP's allocation of skills capital projects. And when you add up the total amount of money that was spent by the LEP on capital projects relating to skills, including ESF, that amounts to over £120 million, in addition to some funds that came about through COVID, again, which Helen's referred to. The Skills Working Group also led on some really very fundamentally important initiatives for the education sector in order to meet the needs of those employers that Helen has referred to, and none more so than the Tutor Bursary Initiative and the Become a Lecturer programme, to face up the fact that one of the biggest challenges in any, particularly in the Southeast, exacerbated only by COVID, has been in employing staff members to be able to teach the students or work with employers to meet those future skills needs. So it's identified and driven some really important initiatives there. And again, as Helen has said, the Skills Working Group and the SAP together oversaw a range of events, from careers roadshows to events on inclusive growth, and a multitude of other things. In terms of the keys to the success of that group, given the diversity of its stakeholders, initially when I joined, and one has the opportunity and has had the opportunity to be part of a number of these sorts of working groups and committees and boards over the years. And the thing that struck me most when I first joined the LEP Skills Working Group was the energy, the passion, and the commitment of the people around the table. And I think what impressed me even more actually over time was how that energy and commitment from those members was sustained over such a period of time, regardless of what was going on in the big wide world. And again, including, as Helen has suggested, a very difficult time during COVID. And I think, that sustained energy, commitment, and focus is down to probably 3 or 4 things. The first of which has already been mentioned, I think, by others on the webinar this morning. That's about having the right people around the table. And that's a combination of the people for whom it's part of their job, it's in their job description, but people with the same shared values and the same commitment, who are passionate about what they do and want to make a difference. Secondly, I think it's about that shared purpose. Now, you can have a shared sense of purpose, but having a shared purpose as a collective is different. And I think the Skills Working Group had a clear remit, had a clear purpose, had clear priorities. And when it began working with the SAP, I think that concert between the two became even clearer for us all as well. And for me, it's not just about that being delegated or devolved to a group, but I think the Skills Working Group was able to inform those priorities, to identify what that future vision, that sense of purpose was. And therefore, people were bought into their role as a member of that group, bought into their role and responsibilities as part of the bigger picture, not just their day jobs. Thirdly, at the heart of the success and sustaining that energy, I think, again, as other people have mentioned, the SELEP Skills Working Group provided, quite simply, a platform, and a platform in which these people with that energy and drive and requirement in their job role could come together in a safe, trusted, and inclusive space to contribute. And for a lot of people, that could just be listening. And for many others, it could be engaging. I think for all of us, at times, one of the most beneficial things would have been the sharing of all sorts of things, sharing of challenges, sharing of problems, and sharing of our own practice, because you get that amazing sense that shared challenges and shared opportunities brings, and the energy, how energizing it can be talking about those. And finally, for me, in terms of the success of the Skills Working Group, is that, quite simply, it made things happen. And no one wants to be part of a group, do they, or a call or a committee that becomes a talking shop. And, you know, a lot of talking went on, but we came away from every meeting with some very clear next steps, some very clear actions. And, you know, this group was effective. We devised initiatives, we lobbied government, we ran events, we informed key strategies, we benefited from funding. And there's nothing more motivational, is there, than for any group of people to come together to see that they're making a difference. And all of that, I think, comes down to the team sat behind us. So a fabulous team of people led by the very fabulous Louise Aitken, heading up skills for the South East SELEP, demonstrating the strength of leadership wasn't just about the chair, but actually the person doing the work behind, coordinating, managing, communicating, and being that driving force behind all of it. Thank you very much.
Jeremy, thank you. And I think we'd all share your acknowledgement of the work of Louise and the impact she's had, and again, many other colleagues across SELEP, you know, in their work areas, in the sectors, being there and being, you know, change agents and supporting, you know, work across the piece. Now, I was going to ask the white label colleagues, can we see? There we go. So there you go. For everyone's benefit, looking at the winner there being clear vision and mandate, to which do you feel are the top three priorities? It looks like sufficient resources comes in a sort of healthy second, alongside evidence-led. So yeah, I suppose it's hard to argue with that, really. But I suppose we're all operating, particularly those of us that work in the public sector now, where those resources are under very, very significant pressure. So, you know, challenging time. And I think actually that pressurized environment often is a cauldron where you can forge, you know, some really strong relationships, you know, working across the different sectors to get stuff done. So that's very helpful. Now, I want to kind of move on and start hopefully a discussion, really, a kind of more interactive session now. I'm really grateful to Daniel Frid from Cavendish, who has put a comment in the chat, which effectively is a question, which is around the importance and role of leadership in these partnerships. A question really whether that leadership is better in being from the private sector. What in our SELEP language we'd say business led against kind of public sector, and I'm giving an example there from outside of the LEP, but Kate Willard, you know, for her leadership and her unbridled energy as part of being the Thames Estuary Growth Board envoy. So I just wonder anyone that wanted to come in on that, really, in relation to that question. So, you know, what are the benefits or the opportunities associated with a kind of business-led leader, but also the role of leadership in terms of delivery within this kind of partnership work? Is there anyone at the panel that wants to come in? Otherwise, I'll call out maybe Nick. I don't wonder what your views are coming out of the Housing and Development Group. I think that group's terms of reference sets that the chair of that group should come from one of the 3 developer groups across the Southeast. You know, what's your view about business-led rather than public sector-led in that space?
I personally would probably go for business-led, but it's not that firm in my view, because I think each organisation has its own demands and requirements. But certainly I sort of see the expertise and knowledge that the business-led candidate can bring to the table is definitely worth a good listening to, if nothing else. And from my perspective, they probably have a little bit of the time and the reason to be there as well. So and to try and make it work. So they have the context generally. So I think from my perspective, it would be business-led.
Okay. Any other comments on that? Deirdre and then Sally.
I think actually leadership comes in many forms and from many places, and I don't think it necessarily needs to be public sector or private sector led. I think it's about the quality of the person, I think, in that sense of, you know, you need somebody who's going to step up, and particularly, I suppose I'm thinking particularly during COVID, where the challenges were great and many, you know, I think it required a certain ability and to look into the horizon and see what potentially was coming over the hillside, good or bad. I think to be collaborative and not sort of precious about whose badge was on things, which is one of the reasons I think this SELEP structure works so well, because, you know, I think Jeremy mentioned about them being a platform. I think that sense of being able to support people to deliver great things in a collaborative way. But for me, I think particularly during COVID, the most important thing was to listen, you know, to listen to what partners needed, what business needed, what the constraints for public sector were, and then just to try and get on and do something. You know, I think the vision is very important, a clear idea about what we're trying to do, but fundamentally, I think that bravery just to go, we have to try and do something, and we're going to try and do something together. I think is key. So, you know, I think those qualities are eminently available in both the public and the private sector. But, you know, somebody needs to, you know, to step up. But I think it was Sarah saying earlier, the fact that or Sally saying that, you know, having people around you going, what can I do, rather than what can you give me, I think is critical. So yeah, a partnership approach, but yeah, somebody needs to be brave.
Yeah, I see in the chat, and I really want to encourage people to use the Q&A bit of that rather than the chat for questions. But Lucy, I think very helpfully put in there, can it not be both? Co-led as a partnership? And I suppose, if you like, really, that is exactly what we're talking about today, isn't it? Is how the SELEP as a business-led entity, in a space where public and private come together, has been able to convene and bring people together on common cause. And I think using what was a challenge in geography, the 3 counties, but using that as a strength. In terms of the greater than the sum of the parts, if you like, in terms of where we were able to identify common cause. And I will bring in Nick a bit later, I think, because colleagues have spoken about how they used these partnership structures in COVID. And I think there is an element of never waste an emergency, a crisis. And I think that there was a lot of really good work that came out and added value, if you like, and actually cemented the importance of being part of these partnerships. But Sally, you wanted to come in.
Actually, my point was very similar to Deirdre's. I was just going to question that word leadership, because as Deirdre says, I think it comes in very many forms. And I think we take the view that CKEN's image needs to be one of leadership. We need to give the sector a sense that it has a voice. But actually, the actual culture of the network is very much about, as Sarah said, an all-inclusive. Anyone who's interested is welcome to be there, feel to it. So we see ourselves much more as conveners than as leaders. But I also agree with Deirdre's point that nonetheless, when it comes to delivering something, someone needs to step up and take a lead to make sure that things happen. And I would also suggest, and it's the reason I wanted to pick up on the language, is that I think the thing that kills a partnership is any sense that someone is trying to surf the partnership for their own gain. So there is no room in a healthy partnership for people to sort of self-promote or just use it simply to achieve what they're there to do. You have to have a sense that everyone's in the room trying to achieve something together. And I think that's going to be one of the big challenges, because the South East Creative Economy Network is going to go independent when the LEPs transition into the local authorities. And I think that's where our challenges are really going to start, because we don't have that natural home of being, in that place where we've got that wider geography and we have to share space. Although that's what we do want to continue to do. But I think it will become more challenging to protect that sort of culture. I think, do we have a chair who's frozen? Have we lost Brian?
Have we lost Brian?
Brian left, but he's back again. Are you back, Brian?
Apologies. I think there might be some issues with the broadband, but I was following some of that. So can you all hear me okay?
Yeah,
we're good. And I'm done, Brian, so you can pass on to Helen.
Very good. I'm very pleased to be back in the room. There you go. So Helen, you put your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to further add that the leadership really within our group, I think it varied in terms of what the topic was. Skills is huge, and you can go down rabbit holes. And I think each individual that joined there at times were the leader. And it was really on what the topic was and what people's specialisms were. So for me, I agree with the other presenters in as much that it's not any one person necessarily. It's about utilising the skills that are within that collaboration, and each person bringing their own leadership skills to the relevant matter. So I think it comes in all guises, and it can be beneficial to share that leadership, but have somebody as coordinator of it. And there were times when there was difficult conversations, because it might have been one sector's real big concern, but not the others. And actually you couldn't focus all of your time on that one sector's issue. You had to look at the commonalities and what the challenges were as a common group. And that's where leadership then did really step in, as, yeah, it is important, I don't disagree, but how can we make that work for all of us? So yeah, I just wanted to sort of agree with everybody else, really.
Thank you, Helen. So, and really grateful. We're getting now questions coming in through the Q&A. encouraged the delegates say you can use a thumbs up if there's particular questions there you want to be prioritised. But going chronologically, Simon Cook has posed the question: what experience, successes or reflections on doing things differently can the panel share on helping to manage the sometimes shorter term political expectations of leaders who have been democratically elected when working in partnership? So it's that issue there, really. So politicians work on an electoral cycle. Some of the partnerships look beyond that. How do you, I suppose, in a sense, manage those potentially competing interests? And I'm grateful for Deirdre for a brave hand to go up there. There you go, Deirdre.
Sorry, I thought I'd better take one for the team, as you know, having dealt with ministers of many shades over 30 odd years of working. I think two things, Simon. Great question, by the way. The first is data. Politicians, everything from Secretary of State of DCMS right down to local councillors. I think I find, particularly in my sector, anybody who's ever been on holiday or done a day trip is an expert in tourism. But actually, and their last experience tends to inform a lot of what their opinions about tourism and what needs to be done should be. But I found the more we have as an organisation invested in research and look at what the numbers are telling us and what customers are telling us, the more you can actually shape an argument or rebut some of our some more left field suggestions, and actually be able, and particularly I think for the myriad of projects we've heard about this morning, the data about the impact they've had has been really key. I would also say the importance of case studies, because numbers are important, but nothing sways a politician more than some of the great, I'm sure, case studies that you've had, particularly around employment and local impact. And all of them fundamentally are interested in their constituencies, how big or small. So examples about real business impact. So for example, on the project that we were running, the real, I suppose, beauty of it was the ability to be able to make quick interventions and quick, small interventions to businesses that were going to have an immediate impact. So for example, if you can cast your mind back to the time when businesses or hospitality businesses were only able to serve meals outdoors, the ability to be able to provide small grants for people to suddenly be able to provide covered seating outdoors and reopen is a really fantastic example of what you can do with a very small amount of money to make a massive difference to a particular business, to start to rebuild the economy in the area, and actually to start supporting local residents to go out and have a good time again. So I think, yeah, for me, it's data and it's, great case studies, and always take it back to their locality, both from the business perspective, but absolutely more and more I'm hearing about communities and community impact. So the more we can measure that, the better.
Thank you, Deirdre. Sally?
Yeah, I mean, building on what Deirdre said, really, all of which I completely agree with. I think all of us working in local government are very familiar with this. You have to try and hold a story and create some sort of continuity. And that's where data, like in CKEN's example, we have the statement of intent, which actually we're just taking a look at the moment. It's probably about 4 or 5 years old now, but we would say 90% of it still is spot on. That which isn't spot on is only because we've achieved some of those things now. So we have to try and hold some sort of consistency. And then we all know that we've got to have that pipeline of projects so that as and when the right funding comes along, we can jump on the bandwagon. I think the real challenge, and this is less positive, but I think we all recognise it, is actually it's when you're working with the private sector, understandably, it is so frustrating for them to understand how slow the machinery of both central and local government work. So it's interesting that in the example of the grants programme that Visit Kent ran in response to the pandemic. One of the reasons it was possible to do that quickly was it just so happened that the Southend team were just coming out of running a lot of ERDF grants programs. They knew this stuff like the back of their hand, and they pivoted really quickly, that word we used all the time back then, and were able to turn that around and do those grants really quickly. If they hadn't been there, I think it would have taken us much longer to get the money into the hands of the businesses. And of course, we've now lost all of that expertise. That team have dispersed because the money isn't there to be distributed from any sources at the moment. So it is definitely a challenge. And I think definitely one of the things that we experience in all public-private partnership working.
Sally, thank you. Nick?
It's a very good question, because a little while ago, probably about a year ago, I spoke to a leader of one district, and I said, what's your ambitions? What do you want to achieve? And they said to me, well, I've got about a year before it's changed. So it's going to be fairly limited. So it's certainly important to bring along officers as well as the elected members, and also make sure that the trust is there between the two sectors, that you're there to help and assist. And one of the things that we found very useful across the SELEP area is member training, where we've actually been along and seen some of the districts and planning departments, planning committees rather. We've actually sat down with them and discussed some of the challenges they have, and tried to help them in some of their ways, not decisions, and nothing about specific jobs, but just in the way that we operate, and try to help them understand what we're trying to get across.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I'm going to share that first question. The first time we did that in Hastings, I chaired the particular panel with the Development Control Committee, a question time. One of the members posed a question: with all the resources and expertise at your disposal, why do you always get it so wrong? Which was a kind of nice way to start the conversation. But we warmed up from there. I think that was about viability at that point, Nick, that they were raising those things. But Jeremy.
Yeah, just to add, and it's very relevant to the kind of the context and the brief for today's webinar, isn't it? But I think, and that is to leverage the power of partnership. So, you know, whether it's lobbying, influencing, educating ministers, politicians, you know, civil servants, I think it's about embracing that, because that's part of our responsibility, but then leveraging the power of doing so collectively. Joined up, that argument, that rationale, that evidence base is always more powerful. So just thought I'd add that.
I think one thing that we found in our housing work, particularly, I think, and this was through COVID, but other times, that the fact that we were able to convene colleagues from across both business and the public sector with quite a solid single ask on occasion on an issue that is joined up, for where government officials but also politicians often would think there would be competing interests. That can be very compelling, because they talk to industry, that they talk to there's public sector, and there are the different sectoral representatives that lobby them. But when you're able to convene planners sitting next to developers, both saying that this is an issue and we need you to respond to it because it's an issue for both of us, that's hard to not listen to. And I think that's what that has been a real strength of the convening role, is we've gone in and there've been, as I say, shared questions, but also what we've done is not only posed the problem, but provided a solution as well that they can engage with. Bandwidth of in both politically and within the civil service is relatively narrow. They've been through the same austerity challenges as local government, and so working with them and providing solutions, not just problems, is an important part of this kind of work. So I'm going to move on back into the questions coming from the delegates. And Roddy, it seems popular with 5 thumbs up from Sustrans, is: where do health and well-being priorities fit with a business-led approach? And was this tested during the pandemic? Says there appears to be a closer relationship between the economy and health and well-being since the pandemic. So anyone want to come in on that question? Deirdre.
Again, it's a really good question, and I think it's one of those trends that was evolving pre-pandemic, but was sort of turbocharged by it. I think, for us, there's two big opportunities. One, there's quite a strong business opportunity. So we were involved in a project called Experience, which was a European project, sadly just come to an end, but it was about developing sustainable experiences around year round, and it sort of hit right in the middle of COVID. It wasn't a COVID project, but it's sort of our particular product development stage was right in the middle of, I think, lockdown too. But the idea was to support particularly rural businesses to develop new experiences. An awful lot of them, the vast majority of them, were sort of well-being, nature focused, so foraging, forest bathing, and these were teeny super micro businesses that had never really thought about themselves as a tourism, bookable product. And our job was to support them to develop that and then sell it into the market. So when we came out of the pandemic, you sort of had that sweet spot where you hit that rise of new product to exactly what the market was looking for. I think the other thing that happened, of course, was people being out and about and just experiencing nature, because there's anything we could do, and understanding how important well-being was in terms of your general balance in life, but also productivity. And I think as more of us have moved to a hybrid way of working, that has stuck. So what we are, I think, there's two opportunities there. An opportunity and a challenge, I think, really. One is around the commercial ability of particularly the 3 counties, as having significant rural offer, to be able to leverage that in terms of offering it for corporate away days or individual well-being, etc., and support local businesses and small businesses to diversify into that market. But on the other hand, I think it's being able to monitor and evaluate the benefit of it. So, for example, we've always looked at economic impact spend as being the success criteria, but actually, how do we measure the quality and quantity of our destinations and our areas in terms of well-being as a tool to support individuals and communities to attract new businesses in, and also to attract visitors in. You can do a bit of it through sort of surveys, and we do a lot of residence research as to how people feel about living in a place. But one of the things I'd really like us to see more of is how do we quantify and evaluate the benefits, which are of themselves a bit nebulous. So I think it's a really interesting area that I think we all collectively need to keep looking at, because I don't think it's going anywhere fast. Thank goodness, because it's important, I think, that one of the few positive things that's come out of COVID.
Deirdre, thank you. Sally?
Yeah, I mean, Deirdre's right. It's not going anywhere fast, is it? I mean, it's so interesting that the national debate on health has sort of more and more emphasis now on prevention, because it's lack of prevention that's bringing health services to a crisis, isn't it? So in terms of South East Creative Economy Network, we have public health representatives on the network. And at least some of those come from East Sussex. We're particularly fortunate in East Sussex. Our Director of Public Health is really passionate about the crossover between creative activity and positive health outcomes. And it was as a consequence of that we now have representation on CCEN as well. Completely agree about the point about data and evidence. When it comes to the crossover between creative activity and health outcomes, there is so much more evidence out there than there was 12 years ago, and well promoted, sort of all captured in one place through the Health and Wellbeing Alliance. So really worth looking at. And when you bring that into that question that we're here to talk about, which is the link between private and public partnership, in East Sussex, the public health team are running, they've just set up a creative health support collaboration. And really what that's about is it goes back to Sarah's and my earlier point, it's about language, because and Deirdre used the word nebulous, you know, a moment ago. It's just that hugely frustrating point about, we know that creative activity has positive health outcomes, but does the cultural sector have the right language to describe what they can do in a way that a health professional, A, can understand it from themselves, but B, then feels that it's within their mission match and their clinical requirements to actually commission that work and spend money on it, because that's where the weak link tends to be. And I will say, I mean, I'm working with some amazing people in health. It's an absolute joy. I recently had a meeting with 2 other people. We were all saying we all work in that intersectional space between the health sector and the creative sector, and we were saying that all 3 of us really struggle with the language on the health side, because it's such an overwhelmingly complex place with a phenomenal number of different acronyms. So definitely a challenging area, but one that I think we definitely shouldn't miss. And I'm just going to add, because we don't talk enough about art when we're talking about the creative sector. Deirdre just gave me this real pang of remembrance about that need we all had during those lockdowns from those close to home experiences like forest bathing. If any of you want to read a book that's a beautiful reflection on what we all went through and how it affected our mental health, I would really recommend Light Rain Sometimes Falls by Lev Parikson, which is a poetic but very personable, easy to read book based on the 72 Japanese micro seasons. And when I started reading it, it felt really current. By the time I'd finished a year, I felt like I was beginning to read about history, because we've all moved out of that era. So if anyone needs a bit of joy at this dull time of year, I would thoroughly recommend it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sally. And I think that you know, the Director of Public Health in East Sussex, Daryl, is the example of a public sector leader making a difference. Daryl, rather, I suspect, uniquely for a public health lead, studied architecture first before coming into, going into public health. And I think, he has certainly been a real advocate for the links to housing. And Nick will know that, as part of Developers East Sussex, as regular involvement from public health in that, but also East Sussex have supported bringing a chap called Michael Courts to help support the interaction across the broader housing with health, but also into our group Des. So there's a lot of good work. And I think, COVID, reasserted, didn't it, the prominence of public health within being ready and able and agile to both protect the economy but also protect individual well-being through times of crises like that. But Nick, you want to come in, and then Sarah, and then we'll move on.
So business definitely responded to the pandemic without a doubt, and that's why we ended up with our regular meetings with DLUG, where we were trying to encourage building to continue as best it could be out there, and trying to keep the economy going. And the industry responded to actually make sure that they were building in a COVID secure way as much as they possibly could. The interesting fact about it is people were still buying homes even when we were in total shutdown. I know this is what people do when they've had a couple of glasses of wine at 11 o'clock at night, is buy the odd book, but they don't normally buy a house. And it's interesting how the people reacted to that. The industry, on the housing industry, for instance, responded. House types changed. We all saw people doing Zoom calls, sitting on their kid's bedroom on the bed. The developers responded to make sure there was space in the kitchen or some other area that could be used for a Zoom call in the best of ways, and that sort of helped. Co-worker space has made a big gain, where people are still working from home but still looking to get out of the house, but to go just down the road. It responded with the open space. We've seen that with rewilding and lots of other things where people want access, and we've got to encourage them to have access so they can actually make sure that they enjoy their surroundings as well. And the industry has had to respond to all of these things. And I have to say, I don't think it will be going back.
Brilliant. No, thank you, Nick. And Sarah?
And just to add really that because of CCEN and because on South East Creatives we really embedded the sector into delivery, and it was leading delivery, we knew instantly what was happening with our freelancers and with our businesses. We had that instant feedback, and we could, you know, freelancers in particular were feeling isolated and alone. And because we'd got those services already working at that grassroots level, we were able to provide the support either through the local coordinators or the cultural hub, bring people together, signpost the right things. So it was built in, the support was built in unknowingly.
Thank you, Sarah. So we have Azaria Bradley has asked, hi all, I have a very simple and straightforward question. That's always a worrying, isn't it, when people say that? It's like when they say with respect to you, they don't mean it, do they, generally? How do the cross-sector partnerships initially begin? I hear a lot about programs and initiatives launching, and it's explained as mandates and public sector and industry. But who initiates this? Is it down to who you know and finding out about openings? Oh, there you go. Well, Sally, you're keen there, and Jeremy. So let's go Sally and then Jeremy.
I'm really sorry that I jumped in, but I'd already read the question and I loved
Very
it.
good.
And I really want to tell people about how CCEN started, because it really goes to the heart of that question. So when LEPs were first like on the cards, Andrea Stark, who at the time was the chief exec of High House Production Park in Purfleet, recognised that there was a risk that the creative industries would not have a voice at the table. And so she phoned up a few mates in the sector, people she'd worked with before who she knew could talk authoritatively about the sector, and they formed CCEN. And I joined next because I got wind of it and I rang her up and went, I know I'm not from the sector, but please can I come too? And so we built up a voice. And we claimed that space rather than being offered that space. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why we will live beyond the LEP, because although the LEP has been a brilliant, if you like, docking station for us, we are much more than just the subsector of the LEP, and that's how we intend to stay. Equally, here's another crazy example. When I came to East Sussex County Council, I set up what was called the Cultural Advisory Board to oversee the delivery of the cultural strategy. When LEPs came along, as many of you will know, we in East Sussex, we love an acronym because East Sussex works so well in an acronym. So we've got Business East Sussex and Team East Sussex and Skills East Sussex and all these TESs and BESs. So overnight, we sat round a table and we went, let's just rename ourselves Culture East Sussex. And without any internal conversations, all of a sudden, when the family diagrams were being shared about what our federated LEP looked like, Culture East Sussex started popping up. I hadn't even had a conversation with my own manager about it, but an assumption was made that by changing our name, we suddenly had that authority. And oh my goodness, did it then amplify what we were doing? That whole question of right and mandate, I think you've got to be bold, haven't you? And obviously the risk you run is that you come up against another group of people who've claimed the same mandate. But I think in the cultural sector, we'll always find a way to work it out.
Brilliant, thank you. And Jeremy?
Yeah, I think Sally makes some great points. I mean, mine was simply going to be, if there's a priority that needs addressing, grab hold of it. That's that space to own. If something needs addressing, grab hold of it. And again, using that what a fabulous example. Using that great example, all you need to do is find like-minded people. So with the passion, the drive, the energy, the people that are doers, that want to make things happen, or with, hopefully, skin in that game, because you need some of them in there as well. And then establish your common cause and away you go. I think there's another question about resource. I'm just going to weave my answer in about that at the same time. A lack of resources doesn't need to get in the way, because if you've got the drive, the commitment, the energy, and the common cause, anything's possible. And people at the outset are willing to give their own time and resource to get things up and running. There's resources out there. They don't need to be a barrier.
I think Jeremy has said, people say there's no money. That's never the case. It's about how people prioritise and use that money. And when they said there's no funding, the funding might not be there today, but my experience is always something comes along. And being, one of the things I think our groups have done is sort of being bid ready, and it might not be, by ideas and the ability to be agile and convene kind of the coalitions, the willing at pace to be able to take advantage of that, sometimes those politically led initiatives that have quite short turnaround times. And that, again, having these partnerships in place, people ready and willing and able, if you like, to come together at short notice to do stuff, has been one, I think, again, one of the positive things from this. So I'm gonna bring in Joe Rossi's question now, which, Jeremy, you kind of already started on a little bit there, but this has been a supremely interesting conversation. Thank you, Joe. Thank you to you as well. I'd be interested in hearing more about some of the partnerships around the table where there's been a very clear purpose, as opposed to a sense of purpose, which I think is a clear distinction, but zero budget to deliver, other constraints, and how was momentum maintained? While people think about that, I would say maybe just something about Nick's group, the Housing and Development Group. The LEP really didn't put any direct money into housing delivery. It was identified early as a priority in the original SEP. There was a jobs and homes ambition, which we, in my career in housing, uniquely hit with, in terms of the original SEP, we set an ambition to deliver an additional 100,000 homes across the southeast, and that target was hit. But people have continued to engage with the Housing and Development Group, not because of the largesse, the money that the LEP brings, but it was a space that they found common cause. And so they weren't coming there for capital, they weren't even coming there for revenue, but they kept coming because they were able to come up with shared solutions. And that was about either deploying their own resources in case, or making the case to others, be that locally or nationally, as part of what we're doing. But so it's not just about budget, but it's about people coming together with a shared ambition to make that difference. That is really critical to this. But does anyone else want to come in on that question from Joe? Deirdre and then Sally.
I absolutely think, as Jeremy is alluding to, if you have a coalition of the willing, magic can happen, and a shared sense of purpose. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of what I'm calling strategic cash, because actually, cash on the table does enable people to do stuff and to perhaps collaborate and build those partnerships, which may not necessarily happen otherwise. So this is where I think some of the projects that SELEP have funded have been really, really important. If they do have that sense of being either addressing a specific challenge like COVID, or trying to have a particular focus or a strong strategic purpose, as was alluded to in one of the earlier questions, then I think the legacy and the longevity of these groups will outlast the project funding. So, for example, we had sort of two phases to one of our projects. One, as I said, was very much grant focused, about that sort of customer confidence rebuilding. But the sort of second project that we did was a second phase of it was much more around place and engaging stakeholders to kind of think about what place meant post COVID. And I think the work that came out of those discussions and the collaborations and people talking to each other who wouldn't necessarily normally be this around the same table was really valuable, and those sort of partnerships can continue. But I think you're absolutely right that it's always important to keep looking for the funds that may be out there. But I think when funders are thinking about how they can make a difference, a small amount of money to get people around the table to be focused on a strategic piece of delivery cannot be underestimated. But it's got to be the right project with the right intent, Otherwise, there is always a danger that once the money's gone, it dissipates. But if it doesn't, if it is the right purpose, then I think those powerful alliances can really outlast the funding. And that's really important at the moment where funding is few and far between.
Absolutely. Yeah, Deirdre, very much so. Sally?
I think usefully my starting point is sort of the opposite of Deirdre's, but I think that reflects the difference between Deirdre's running an organisation where she's sort of fighting to make it sustainable, and I'm working in a local authority, and I just really want to recognise that up front. So I'm not disagreeing with Deirdre, I'm just saying I think there's two sort of different ways of looking at it. I really love the question, and a quote that I always have in front of me is that passion drives purpose, but data drives decisions. And I think that's often really fundamental to how, particularly when you're running a partnership as huge as the South East Creative Economy Network, because we're pretty enormous, is passion gets you around the table, but actually to decide what you're going to prioritise, you do need to bring it back to facts. I know this is a really tough one, but I would also argue that when there's no money on the table to begin with, it's a quite good test of resolve. And to share another anecdote, I do something called the Friday email, which goes out to the Sussex creative sector weekly. Nobody else, as far as I'm aware, does it. And it's a shortcut to the complexities of what's available in terms of funding for the creative and the cultural sector, so creative and heritage, and also sort of key points about things people need to be aware of that are in the sector. I had someone come to me recently with a sort of fundamental, I need some money to, build my passion project. Can you help me? And I said, yes, I'll start sending you the Friday email. And I sent them the most recent version, and they came back and they said, to save me the trouble, could you point to me to what you think would be the best funds I could pitch for? And what I really wanted to say to them was, if that's too hard for you, you will never make your passion project work. And I did say, I'm really sorry, but that bit's down to you because you know your project more than me. But every project needs a tough bit at the beginning. It's like any relationship, isn't it? You've got to start with a tough bit. And on the relationship metaphor, my last point would be, I think money can be a really bad starting point for building a relationship with partners. Actually, if you start with nothing, then that goes back to that point about, instead of people turning up wondering what's in it for them, they turn up wondering what they've got to contribute to the partnership. Of course, in the end, it needs to pay dividends, but I think it could be a really dangerous starting point.
So gold diggers need not apply, Sally, if you like, in that space. So
that's one way of putting it, yeah.
Indeed, yeah. So I need to bring things to a conclusion and pass the baton to Liz, but I'm going to be a bit self-indulgent now on behalf of us at the LEP, and just pose a question to all of you, and I'll take it as you're on the screen, and I need you to be brief. But what difference has the LEP made to your work, to the partnership, to things you're important to you? I'll start with Deirdre.
I think it gave us, to use Jeremy's phrase, a platform to have a cohesive discussion about what we could do in the face of an incredibly dramatic, unprecedented challenge for the visitor economy. I think it gave us an opportunity to collaborate across the region to smash through those ridiculous political boundaries and, sort of sometimes parochial priorities, to actually go, what does the sector need? How can we help? And just to work with some great people. So thank you. Thank you,
Deirdre. Nick?
Allowed a voice, bringing in both Essex and East Sussex into the developer group side of it, and sharing best practice. Certainly, planning protocols are a very good example of that.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. I think you meant to mention me as well in that, wasn't it? I knew that's what you meant to say, but we'll come on to that another time. Jeremy?
Oh, I'll try and keep it brief. Joined up voice, I think, is important. A sense of some clarity, cohesion, strategy in amongst the craziness that happens in our worlds, probably, I think, is important. And at times, energizing, revitalizing, and inspiring.
Sarah, brilliant. Thanks, Jeremy. Sarah?
The creative industries is made up of like hundreds of microclusters right across the region. And what it did was join up those microclusters, gave us a voice, meant we could start to influence how government thinks about central government funding and access that funding.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sally?
And it joined us to you, Brian, as well, of course.
Thank you. Yeah. Sally?
Yeah, I would just add to that amplification, which is Nick's point really, and credibility, sort of being able to carry the SECAM brand added to that. So it goes back to that, sort of gave us a mandate.
Yeah, I think it turned the volume up when you come together, isn't it, in terms of where you could reach. And Helen?
For me, it was the passion of a group of people that collaborated, that all wanted to make the same difference, really, and not realising that yours wasn't the only sector necessarily that had those challenges, and that listening to other sectors and their challenges, how could we collaborate to make that difference? For me, that was, you know, really powerful. And the relationships that have come about because of the group that are now used externally of that group has been also very beneficial.
Yeah, I think I don't get agility was something. I remember Derek Godfrey used to talk about, he was a board member a while ago, about one of the things he liked of the LEP compared to some other partnerships was its agility. But I think it's been energising, empowering, and just, you know, in a personal view, I've been very proud to be associated with the work of the LEP and the impacts it's had. And I think particularly proud of how we used the partnerships to make a really positive difference through COVID, and a number of you have mentioned that this morning. So I'm a little bit over 2 minutes, Liz. Apologies for stealing some of your time, but it's over to you now as our sort of summary and close. But what I suppose I should say, thank you so much to all of you for your time this morning in both listening to us but also contributing to these discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you very much. Just one final question to share with people, which is, what's the biggest thing that you would take away from this session? What do you think has been taken from that? So now it just popped up on the screen. So if you could be happy to think about that. Another question is, which is sort of the reason for us all being here, is what now in terms of cross-regional working? And this was badged as a legacy webinar, and wow, I've been sitting here scribbling my notes down, thinking what an incredible legacy. There's been so much positive language, and Sarah and Sally started off talking about the importance of communication, and then Joe Rossi picked it up in the chat as well, saying that a lot of it is to do with communication and how we've got a shared voice, which Jeremy mentioned. And that's the thing that for me has come across really strongly today. It's a really nice position to be able to be sitting here and summarising what people have said. COVID was mentioned a lot, and Deirdre used the word support. That was another, piece of very positive language. The points about teams and leadership and the way that people have worked together, and Helen talked about this, and there was a real sense of pride in the work that people have done. And the first question gave us this very clear answer about a clear vision and mandate, and the word vision has been used quite a lot. And this, I think, refers back again to this shared purpose, but that's not forgetting the real pragmatism that has been mentioned as well. And particularly Nick mentioned that's been linked though to an ambition and a drive to make things happen, which Jeremy mentioned, that is the purpose of why everybody's here and what everybody's been doing, and that wish to really make a difference. Skills inevitably has featured a lot in conversations, and the value of those and them being shared regionally, which again Helen particularly mentioned, and obviously the word collaborative and the way that then the collaboration makes a platform to move things forward. Deirdre used the word bravery, actually, which I think is a really good word, and sort of a bit surprising, but actually I thought, wow, that's really powerful. And the fact that it's easier to be brave together, and sometimes particularly again referencing back to COVID, the need for people to act quickly to actually make a difference, because we just didn't have time in those days to just chat around like we are today, having a lovely time saying how wise we were. We just needed to crack on and do things. And when Brian reminded us of the importance of the word partnership and the fact that it's not about egos, and we've heard a lot of people talking about teams and trying to avoid talking about themselves today, to get this real common cause. And Brian also said about us being greater than the sum of the parts, which is really, really true. And the word inclusion, when you link that to collaborate, to the word collaborate, then you're starting to get something really, really powerful. And Sally referred to the need to preserve a culture, which when you go back to what's the future for this type of working, you realise how significant it is. The impact of this is something which will be referenced by the report, which has been mentioned previously. So I would really encourage people to have a look at that. And the thing that is really good is I've got this far through my summary without mentioning money. And that tends to be something that particularly as part of KMEP, people just say, oh, what's the point of KMEP if there isn't any money? And Jeremy did remind us that there was £120 million invested by SELEP just in skills, which is, and then Deirdre, really reminded us multiple times of just small pieces of money, how much of a difference they have made. So this is not to disregard the significance of money, but what's really clear is the philosophy behind all this, and the shared language and values and purpose. That's what has made the things happen alongside the money. Because if the money were not able to be channeled in a particular way, then these things would not have happened. And that's the power of partnership, which Jeremy has said a couple of times. And I think that all of these really, really positive bits of language and the use of the word power gives me this optimism for the future and a real determination that we will take this legacy forward for the future success of the whole region. But it will take us time to adjust, because this is massive what's happening, and we're going to have to really try to reinvent things. And so I do want to just state, but just to conclude, that we do need to recognise all the amazing work that has gone on behind the scenes from the incredible team. Alex hasn't been mentioned, and the incredible work that's been done by Sarah Dance, our chair, over a really, really difficult time. I feel so incredibly proud to have been part of it and to work with these people. And so thank you to them. Thank you to everybody for attending today. This has probably been the best webinar I've ever been to, actually. So it's been really good, and what a legacy. And I'm just so proud to have been part of it. So thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Liz. Thank you so much.